It's back. Let's talk about it. Welcome back and thanks for being here. My name is Scott and I got my daughter's car out of this shop. The engine is replaced and it did require an engine. I think I had told you in the previous video that it needed an engine, and we're still not quite sure exactly what caused the engine to fail or the nature of its failure. The number 3 cylinder was just blown out at the bottom, seals and whatever, and the mechanic noted not a lot, but a noticeable amount of oil in the intake. And so he speculated that it's possible that a turbo seal failed, and then the number 3 cylinder was just the first one to attempt to hydrolock. It didn't hydrolock the engine, but that might have been the first one to start to hydrolock, and then that blew out the seal at the bottom of the block. I'm probably not using proper terminology here because I've never really had to describe anything like this before, but the engine did need to be replaced. It could have been rebuilt, but we just didn't want to tackle that. And really a lot of mechanics don't want to do it either because there's a liability involved with rebuilding an engine. And the liability, not that they could get sued or whatever, but imagine being the mechanic that maybe you don't do a lot of rebuilds, and so you rebuild an engine, you put it in the car, and then there's something wrong with it, and you have to take it all out and check everything, maybe start all over again. I don't know how all that stuff works, but if you just get another engine that is known to be good and put it in, you don't have to deal with all that stuff. It's a comparison, if you will, of labor versus parts. So when you replace an engine, obviously the parts are more expensive, but the labor is less. So we went ahead and replaced the engine, and the mechanic quoted not to exceed $6,500 for this swap, and he was right about there. Now, we paid a lot more than $6,500 for this, but that's because we added more parts. Remember, I said that I was going to replace parts that were either giving us problems already or things that we expected to give us problems. And so the car has, looking at it right now, 123,000 miles on it. And so the turbo, being a consumable item, needed to be replaced. I didn't need it, but it was prudent to do so while the swap was happening. Her radiator was leaking a little bit. I don't know why, if that was a light impact from lowered life. Let's see, we went ahead and replaced the other 3 injectors, so now she's got 4 brand new injectors. And the water pump and thermostats on these older cars, and older being this is an early Mk7, they were prone to problems. They were known to have design flaws. And to our knowledge, hers is original. So we went ahead and replaced that as well. And sure enough, once the engine was out and on a stand and I could see it, there was evidence that hers was at least beginning to leak. So this was a good move to do this ahead of time. But all of those parts alone, that was $3,300 in parts. So yeah, this was an expensive ordeal, but we expect that the engine's gonna go for a while now. So this is hopefully the end of engine trouble for a little while. Did you see that bump there? I'll comment about that in a minute. Let's see. The turbo is an IS-20, and it was oddly enough cheaper than buying another IS-12, and the turbo has some good kick to it. Of course, it's no IS-38 and it's not a GTI, but this car does have a bit of oomph to it now. And the funny thing too is my daughter has, I'm not going to call them cheap tires, but maybe they are cheap tires. They just don't grip. She's got a traction problem. Here, check this out. Second gear. That was already spinning. Not so much in third gear, so it doesn't lose traction in third gear like the IS-38 will, but yeah, basically she can just scald the tires right off the car. So she's got more power than she's ever going to need out of this thing. and because it's IS-20 OEM part and not going full bore too wild or anything like that, this is still a conservative tune. I forget the horsepower and torque ratings. I'll flash them up in the screen so that you can see what they are, but she was around 245 as stage 1, and I want to say now she is 280, 285, somewhere around there, and so that's plenty for a young driver. She'll really appreciate that. All right, so some comments that my mechanic had. First, he was really pleased with how clean the engine is. So even though it's got 70,000 miles on it, it looks like it has been well cared for. The intake did need to be cleaned, and that's to be expected. And but the other parts of the engine where he could see in, he said that they were very clean. So he's very pleased with the engine and is very optimistic as far as its health goes. Some other things that he noticed: there were parts missing from the car. I don't know for a fact that the dealer where the car was previously, if that dealership left these parts off, but it sure is suspicious. The parts that were missing, the intake manifold has a little support under it. That was gone. Each intake port has a little split on it, a splitter. I'm going to call them port splitters. I don't know what the proper name is. Those were all missing. Now, we know that that dealership was in there in the intake and removed the intake manifold. So were the parts missing beforehand? I'm going to check with my local dealer, run the VIN on this car, and see if any work like that had been done on this car by the previous owner. I'll comment, or I'll put a note if that's the case, if there had been some work done. But it is not looking good for this dealer, especially when you add the fact, check out this intake. Now, mind you, this is an intake that was supposedly cleaned. They charge us over $700 for an intake cleaning, and this is not what a cleaned intake should look like. I don't know if they sprayed some chemicals in it and all it did was just clean the intake runners but not the valves, but this is not satisfactory. For comparison, here's what my valves look like after my shop. The shop is called Euro Pros, by the way, in Yorktown, Virginia. This is what my valves look like after he cleaned them. I would have expected a dealership to do that well. In fact, somebody posted, I think it was in Instagram, they said, I did a better job than that with brake cleaner and a bundle of zip ties. So, yeah, I am not fond of the job that dealer did on her car at all. I still won't name the dealer, but I will say that they are in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Yeah, if you live in that area, you might ought to take your business elsewhere. So as I record this is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I'm going to jump in the car on Tuesday to go down and get my daughter from the base, drive back. She'll be super thrilled to be able to drive this thing. We're actually going to be able to get home, I think, during daylight hours on Wednesday. And I have no doubt that she'll take this thing for a drive. She's been jonesing for a drive in her car. She's been riding her motorcycle lately too, and she tells me it's been cold, so she's definitely ready to get into something with environmental controls and something with some power. She loves this car. I had noted all the mods that she has on the car, and of course she would have had to give that up if she had opted to sell this car for parts and then start all over with something else. This car, I mentioned, cosmetically it's very close to a GTI. It now outputs power that's a little less than a tuned GTI, but more than stock. The ride, I told somebody in a previous video that the ride on this car was only a little bit more harsh than my GTI, and I got to take that back. When I'm on smooth highways, the, what are these, B14? I think they're B14 coilovers. They ride well on the highway, but on a road that's not perfectly smooth like this one, now I feel the chop. What I don't know is if it's the shocks, the springs, or the fact that she's lowered more than 2 inches, and so the geometry of the suspension is not in an ideal zone for road compliance. So comment below if you know the answer to that. Maybe this car would ride better if it were raised an inch. Not that she's going to do it, but I don't know. It's eventually I'm going to need suspension on my car, so I'll be looking for options. This car, I hope it lasts a long time for her, because I can't afford to do that again, replacing an engine again. And if anything happens to my engine, which my engine has 172,000 miles on it, oh boy, is it going to hurt to replace an engine on that. So I hope that it lasts. And last, I will, well, have I done it? No, I've already shared by now. By the time you see this video, you will have already been exposed to my 6-year anniversary video. So 6 years, 172,000 miles. We'll see if I can get to 200,000 miles in 2023. So, all right. Well, as always, I appreciate you being here. Feel free to post comments or questions below. I'm always happy to respond, and perhaps wish my daughter well wishes for her car in the future. All right. Take care. See you next time.